What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So, come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde, and boy, do we have a special guest. JP Newman is in the house. What's up, brother?
What's happening?
So excited. I don't even know how long we've been trying to make this happen, but it is happening.
A long time. It's happening right now, baby.
Dude, guys, you don't know what's about to happen. Like your ears are about to be filled with the riches of the gods.
I love that. It's a good start. Now we have a lot to live up to.
You know what? If you weren't such a freaking amazing fucking human, I wouldn't have said that. But you are. You can't help it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to tell, if you don't mind, I want to give our audience a little bit about how we know one another, and then we can get into the show. Does that work for you, my friend?
Let's do it.
So, guys, JP, I met JP about a little bit over 18 months ago, and you guys hear me talk about this a lot, that I'm really about like three things in life, creating impact, building relationships, and taking care of myself. The show's a lot about that, right? And this was probably almost 2 years ago. I was doing the whole Miracle Morning thing, and I had this like epiphany that those were the three things I needed to focus on in life. But one of which, the building relationship part, I realized I wasn't building enough relationship. I lived in Austin now it's almost 8 years, 7.5 years. This is 5.5 years into living here. I really didn't make a lot of friends when I moved here. Most of my friends were out of the area. And so I was like, man, this is beginning of 23. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go make a bunch of friends in Austin. And so I went to a party, Brad Weimert's South by Southwest party, and met and was just having a great time. And met a ton of people that night, one of which was a mutual friend of ours, David Gonzalez, and the mayor of Austin, as many call him. And so David, David's like, I got to make an introduction. This is like the first night I met him. He's like, do you know JP Newman? Like, I'm like, no. He's like, you have to meet JP Newman. So this is like the night I meet this guy who's like one of my close friends now. He's just like all about me meeting JP Newman. So he sets me and JP up on a blind date. Okay, now listen. Like we're both married men. We have beautiful, amazing wives, partners for life, and we got a mutual friend of ours setting us up on a blind date to meet. And man, he crushed that. Because I met you and we had a great dinner, and it's been just such a blessing ever since, my friend. So it's been so cool.
It really has. David's only done that to me now. I thought it was once, but ironically, 6 months ago or 7 months ago, your party, one of your evening parties, he did it a second time, and that became our friend Daniel. So he's 2 for 2 now. But you were the original. You're like the OG, and it was very awkward as I'm driving to dinner to meet you. I'm like, what is this? Is like a setup of 2 guys to be friends, it's just like very interesting. But David knew something, man.
Yeah, no, the gods, like the spirit was telling him to make that connection. And I will say this after the fact, I'm like, oh, he's like vibe. He connected the vibe. He's like, oh, those dudes, because you and I do vibe in a very. We're both we'll talk about what we are as we get to the show, but we have a lot in common as far as like how we show up in the world.
I agree.
So I thank you, David Gonzalez. When you listen to this, you're the man. Appreciate you. JP and I owe you a big hug. So guys, I'm gonna give you JP's formal bio, but David definitely crushed it with that intro. And I'll say this, I've had a lot of people make intros for me, but this has been a profound introduction. You've become a very special part of my life, and I appreciate you very much, my friend. And it's good to get to do life with you and get to know you more and more. So this is just the icing on the cake getting to do a show with you. Now, for listeners, you guys know the Greatness Machine is not just me about doing Love Fest with my bros. It is about creating greatness in the world and doing so with folks that have done so despite the odds. And JP is like no slouch when it comes to creating greatness. He's got an amazing background, but I'm going to give you his formal bio, and then we're going to go into some of his origin story. He's the founder of Thrive FP, and essentially they're a real estate investment firm focused on doing great in the world, doing good in the world, really socially conscious real estate investment. They've done over $2 billion in transaction value, and this has been achieved since 2011. They've also established Veritas Impact Partners, which is a nonprofit committed to purpose-driven initiatives for social good. And he is the host of the Investing on Purpose podcast, where he has amazing people. Some guests we've had on the show, some I can't wait to get on the show one day on his show. So we're going to be talking a little bit about his podcast where he's creating greatness in the world, similar to myself on the podcast. But man, JP, I would love if I know you didn't wake up one day and just roll over in bed and you're like, how many billions of dollars in real estate am I going to do? And 2 billion appeared. I know it came through a lot of hard work and effort, but would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about your background, because you didn't start off in real estate. You grinded and you really worked your way to getting to where you got to. Would love to hear some of your origin story.
Sure. I was a late bloomer. I wasn't the kid who at 24 was like some bro who hit it rich. I really worked my butt off. And in fact, I spent most of my 20s listening to Tony Robbins, getting ready to be wealthy. And everything I tried, I valet parked cars. I did 1,000 things. And, I think I started gaining traction. Probably one of the most valuable things that started actually preparing me for my real estate career was getting a very lucky job at Sony Pictures. So I was living in LA, living in Los Angeles at the time. And Sony was looking for someone to run a children's division for them. And I was definitely not the obvious candidate by no means. I mean, I had no film experience. I hadn't produced things, but I actually came from a toy background. I actually had a long time ago, even before that, one of my 20 adventures, I worked for a toy company for several years. And I think my boss, who ultimately became the chairman of Sony Pictures, he saw some hustle in me, Darius. I think that's what you and I share. Like he saw the JP hustle, which I know, again, we share that. And he honestly, they were doing like their own Miramax. It was called Screen Gems, and it's very much like Miramax. And so they were so busy making these like artsy films, they didn't want to bother with the kids division, but they needed one to compete with Disney. So I think they probably thought, who's a high energy person who will just leave us alone so we can make our fancy films and go to the south of France and create a kids division for us. So they gave me almost no parameters, like nothing. They're just like, we need a kids division to compete with Disney. And I was out of the home entertainment division when there were still DVDs before streaming. And so that they always call that is the delivery bank truck of a movie studio. All the money was being made at the time through all those Walmart end caps would have the next holiday film. That's where the money. So the studios really cared about our division. So there was kind of an unofficial thing. JP, we don't exactly know what we want. Just lots of shit we can sell it. Lots of shit we can basically sell across the store aisles, across America and across the world. So with that in mind, that was my that was my instruction from there, was to go create it. And just to make things a little more confusing at big corporations, Darius, I never tell the story, but Sony Music. So there was a rivalry within Sony. There was Sony Music and Sony Pictures, and they didn't like each other. There was like this big Mariah Carey versus Tom Cruise. Like, it was so weird. This is like the dysfunction of a studio. So it turns out Sony Music had a kids division, which is why Sony Pictures wanted. So Sony Pictures wanted one that was bigger and better than its arch rival Sony Music. So I'm sitting there competing with my colleagues at Sony so that Sony Pictures gets to get the rewards. So I was doing shows like Jim Henson's Bear in the Big Blue House. I don't know if you remember Bear in the Big Blue House. Pretty famous kid show. Dragon Tales. These are all like big kid shows. And I was getting them to video. We were producing a lot of Christmas specials. Christmas specials sold great. And I actually got to do the first CGI. When Toy Story came out, they kind of said under $6 million, we'll leave him alone. If it's under $6 million, just let the kid produce it. So I came up with this wacky idea, because Toy Story had just come out, that I'm going to produce my own direct-to-video Christmas special called The Nuttiest Nutcracker. And this little video that I started, by the way, I asked Sony to give me a quote for my little television hour special, and they said $22 million to produce this for you. So then I went to this little studio in Canada, and they said, we can do it for $3.5 million. So when you work for a studio, Darius, the right answer is you spend $22 million not the $3.5 million. Because you want to make everyone happy at the studio. Because you know me, like you, just went to the logical answers. Why would I spend 22 when I've got a studio in Canada that will do it for 3.5? So I kind of shined my other Sony colleagues in the special effects division to get it made for $3.5 million. Then I got CBS to release it as their biggest holiday special right in front of Charlie Brown Christmas. Then I got Carl's Jr. and Hardee's, the largest fast food chain behind McDonald's, to give me a nationwide promotion. So now I'm doing this little video, and I've got it on a major network for Christmas, and I've got it all across the United States going through fast food chains. And I pissed everyone off doing that. And
What?
the only thing that went wrong with my plan is no one really knew how long it would take. It's called rendering. It's when you do digital imaging. Even today, the computer has to take those images and turn them into 32 frames per second to make it go on television. And no one knew how long it was going to take. So we miscalculated the rendering, and they lied to me in Canada because I said, it has to be delivered before Christmas so we can get it on CBS. And they said, don't worry. But then they went dark on me. They totally went dark on me. I did a surprise visit to Canada, to Toronto, and they all cried. They cried. They're like, Uncle, we've been lying to you. We are so far behind. And I would have been screwed. I would have been fired because everybody was pissed off that I didn't spend the $22 million at Sony. So I managed to negotiate with the Children's Research Hospital of Toronto to lend me their supercomputers so that I could finish. They suspended their medical research discovery to finish my show. And in exchange, I gave the Children's Award, Sony televisions, and all the Sony product, so that we got this thing done for Christmas.
Wow.
So that's how I got the Christmas special done.
Oh my God. So was the 22 million a certainty payment? Was that part of it too?
Yeah. It was like Sony ImageWorks. It was like there's so many divisions of Sony that are dysfunctional. One's competing against me. One's charging me 7 times more than what the street was willing to charge me. So it looks bad internally. You're supposed to just accept the more expensive thing because of your Sony brother and sister. And instinctually, as an entrepreneur, that didn't make sense to me.
But I guess what I was saying with that is, had you paid the 22, would you have gotten it without the stress of the Christmas?
Yes, okay. Definitely, 100%.
Yeah. So
I was trying to be frugal for a studio because that's my nature, and it didn't really work. I wasn't a deal maker. It might have been better to spend the 22 million.
Yeah, they're like, hey man, you're not scratching our back over here, buddy. This is bureaucracy. You got to scratch our back, we'll scratch yours.
I wasn't the best bureaucrat. I wasn't the best. I wasn't the best at big corporate policies. But what it did teach me, and I always say that Sony was my MBA for my real estate career. 5.5 years in a movie studio. I was the youngest vice president of a division of 450 people, and I never got my formal MBA. But I felt like 5.5 years at Sony really gave me a lot of corporate discipline that I think I would say that some of my success today and how I even run my company today is based on some of the discipline I got from my Sony days.
So you were at Sony. You're there a few years after college, and you grew up LA, right? You grew up in Southern California in the Valley.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Yep.
And so from there, how did you make your way from that to real estate? Was it like a circuitous path, or I know you spent a few years though. When did you actually get into real estate? What year was that?
I was about 30 years old, about 30, so about 27 years ago. I started.
It was a couple years after Sony.
It was.
How did that work? Why'd you leave Sony, and then what happened next?
Back to politics. The guy, you're going to laugh at this. Now you're going to embarrass me, but why not? Okay. So the guy I didn't spend $22 million with became head of children's television. And he had it out for me because I wasn't loyal to him. So he didn't throw me out. He offered me a really crappy job. He said, I'll put you in the marketing department, because he didn't want to make me. I was so good for Sony. I built a $150 million library for them. So they couldn't really throw me out based on poor results. But he didn't want anything to do with me. He's like, I can't control this guy. He doesn't follow corporate. So they offered me this really shitty job, and I quit with a nice severance.
There's a legal term for that. Did you know that?
Right. No.
It's called good reason, right? So it many times, you don't know this probably because you became a founder and have ran your own company, but what people will do many times, you put in contracts. You'll put in a contract like fired for cause, right? Especially if you bring in outside investors and stuff like that, they'll want for cause and good reason language. The for cause language is like, oh, I can't go, I can't like go and commit a crime or something like that, right? Good reason is because what people end up doing sometimes, and again, like you having started your own company and ran your own company, you haven't had to deal with this, but maybe some of your employees could deal with this if you weren't such an amazing human. Is I could say, hey, VP of acquisitions, you are now the VP of mergers and acquisitions, but your job is to go clean out the closet every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so so like literally people will do that. They'll change your title. They'll make you move to the middle of nowhere. This is a way to get people to quit their jobs.
That's what they did to me. That's exactly what they did to me. They gave me some bullshit marketing. They knew I wasn't a marketing guy. Like it was bullshit. So I left and I actually started my own production company. And I saw how hard it was when you didn't have the Sony muscle behind you. Here's the story. You're going to laugh at the story, Darius. So I got there was a film I fell in love with, and I became an independent director at a company called Big Wheel because I love mountain biking. So it had to be Big Wheel Entertainment out of Venice, California. And my first film was Where the Red Fern Grows, which is a very famous book.
Yeah, I love that book.
Dave Matthews started it, Alison Krauss, and I became the producer because the guy who was producing it before me ran out of money. And halfway through the set, and the kid was getting pimples. The 13-year-old kid is getting pimples. Dave Matthews' agents calling and screaming. Whereas Dave Matthews was lending this production money. And she was just, so I came in to like raise new money. The beginning of my fundraising days, which was my first fundraising, was for movies. And so I'm raising money for this thing. I'm getting calls from Dave Matthews' lawyers saying, her agent, you better get this thing made. This kid's got pimples. I'm going to sue you guys if this film doesn't get made. So the guy I found to talk about twist of fate, you'll love this, Darius. The guy I found to produce my film was a guy who made his money in real estate and lived in Texas.
Wow.
I knew nothing about real estate in Texas. I was just making films. So the guy wants to get in the film business, and he hears Dave Matthews. We had Alison Krauss, the musician. We had a really nice cast, and it's a very classy film. And I brought Disney to the table. We already had Disney. And the guy comes off as very sweet, very like, JP, this is wonderful. And I had a very good contract with him. Like I had one of those LA Century City. Like I don't mess around. I'm like you. I don't mess around. So as soon as I give him the film, right, we sign the contract, he tries to get rid of me. He goes immediately to the south of France with Dave Matthews. He puts them on his private jet. Like he kind of forgot who JP was, even though I'm the producer of the film, funded the film, you put the whole thing together. He kind of forgot. And finally, when the film was being made again and was coming out, he just said to me, look, I'm super rich. You're starting out in your career. I'm going to screw you. I know we've got a good contract, but I'm pretty sure I can out-lawyer you and exhaust you. So here's what you're going to take, bitch. Like that. Here's what you're going to take.
Wait, he pulled a hard retrade just because he could. What a fucking asshole.
And he admitted it to me. He's like, you did nothing wrong. He's like, I'm just not going to pay you. I don't feel like it. And at that time, I'd put 2 years into the film and without pay, just completely based on my back end. So he owed me pretty close to $500,000 plus a piece of every DVD sold at Disney and the television sales. He owed me a piece of. And so he just told me, I'm not going to pay you. I'm rich. It was a good lesson for me, though, Darius. He said, I'm rich. You're poor. I've got leverage. You don't. Fight me if you want, but my lawyers will out exhaust you. And I'll just keep paying them until they squash you. Pretty interesting, huh? Yeah.
It's first of all, it's an eye opener that there are people out there that actually think that that's okay to do that. Which
I know,
and they're more often than not, unfortunately, especially if people
they think of business as a competitive sport where someone wins and someone loses, and so for them it's like not personal. It's just like I'm a champion. Watch me play my tennis, and that's their tennis.
Yeah, I have a technical term, a statement about those types of people. Do you know
what's that?
I say it with all my love and gratitude for being alive. That's a fuck that guy type of person. Fuck that guy.
It's a fuck that guy.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
We all know those fuck that. But do we all in the audience? Who doesn't know a fuck that guy, right?
Yeah, he's a.
Anyways,
fuck that
to make a long story short, I did sue him. and my tough lawyers who took it on contingency because it was this is a good life lesson. When lawyers tell you it's an easy case, we got this. It's contracts. It's obvious. We're going to fight them. We'll take it on contingency. It all sounded great. And then the minute that he actually started shooting bullets back at them with tough lawyers and he's going to put up dispositions, everything he could to make the legal process, they immediately came back to me and said, let's settle quickly. Because they knew they were going to make their money. Like, why take more time for another 100,000 if they could settle quickly? So we settled quickly, and it was enough of a blow. Even though I did make some money and I got some credit on that film, it was enough of a blow that it got me out of the film business. And I said, you know what, enough with this intellectual property, because nobody looks me in the eye and is telling me what's like, I have very little control. So why don't I go from intellectual property to real property? Like, why not take real property? Because it's much easier to control. Like, I don't have to, a movie studio executive can't bullshit me. I don't have to kiss Disney's ass. I don't have some financier who's going to like pull this on me. It's like the whole thing. At this point, I'm in my early 30s and I just had enough. And that's what got me into real estate. And to be honest, Darius, it was a really, really difficult transaction going from, a vice president at a movie studio, living that life of, working with movie stars and just kind of going to the south of France and hyper creative. I'm the guy they're pitching, I can't tell you how many famous people have pitched to me, their early shows and stuff like that. It was just kind of like amazing. Like Seth MacFarlane, before he was Seth MacFarlane, is pitching Family Guy. And like, it's cool. South Park, before it was South Park, like I saw the original pitch. Like there's lots of things like that were super, super cool. And so anyways, it's ironic. So I got into real estate for more control. I was really very depressed. I wound up getting my real estate license, and my dad was kind of just retiring at that point. He kind of had a small syndication shop. He took me in, which was very nice of him, but I was back. He had no office anymore. So he moved back to his home office. So I'm now back in my childhood bedroom. So imagine being 32 years old. My friends are all becoming corporate dudes, and they've got hot girlfriends or wives, and they're traveling, and they're at the prestigious law firm. And I am now broke, working out of my childhood bedroom, no girlfriend, single. Like, my story was shit. Like, I had no story. And all that Tony Robbins, everything I strive for, all those days at Sony, all I had to show for it was a low bank account, a shitty used car, and I was single, just trying to make something of myself. Back in my childhood bedroom working with my dad. Can you imagine, like, the PTSD that would be associated with that?
So it's funny, as like, as you're describing that, I'm like, oh, you sound like a millennial. No, I'm kidding. you're just an early adopter of being a millennial. I'm like, that's now look, JP and I are like Gen Xers. So like millennials are like, what's wrong with that? That's me. And I'm like, yeah, like, listen, if you're Gen X, none of that was okay. None of that. Yeah. Like you moved out of your house like when you're in the early 20s or late teens. So, and you don't go back. So no, that's hard, man. Like I remember I moved home like right after my dad died, and I was there for a year. I was 23, and I'm like, get me the hell out of here. Back in the childhood bedroom. So yeah, that's pretty depressing. But that your dad did give you the gift though, because he was in the business. He was in the real estate business.
He was.
And so were you working with him directly then?
I was. He really mentored me for my first. I was really at a low point in my life. I was devastated that someone could screw me that bad. And it was amazing. He took me under his wing, definitely taught me some great education, enough to get me started. We actually put ads in the newspaper because he was running out of investors. He was at the end of his career. He never had a big investor base, but he had enough. Like, let's just say he had 3 million under management at the time. So like we were buying small properties in Koreatown in Los Angeles and a couple of things. But you know what? All that's what got me started. And then I just realized after a year or two of that, I had something bigger. I think that, your father, no matter who your dad is, will always see you as the 17-year-old. So like, my dad didn't see me as the former vice president at Sony, who had his own staff, who had his own division that was producing films. He saw me as a 17-year-old, proud of me, but like he can only see me one way. And by the way, the funny thing, Darius, about LA is when I told people that I left film and went to real estate, I became a lot less interesting to most people. I was not interesting. In fact, they're like, you can't help me. You don't work for a movie studio. Like, who are you? In fact, people would say to me, I'm like, you're in real estate. Do you want to sell me a house? And I'm like, I don't sell houses. I'm doing private equity real estate finance. So like, Sure you are. You want to sell my house?
That's so funny. That's
Talk
so
about
funny.
talk about humiliation, humility, and reinvention. You know,
Well, you know what's interesting? I heard Scott. You know, do you follow Scott Galloway at all? Prof G. He's like,
I went to UCLA. He was my fraternity brother.
oh shit. You know Scott Galloway? You guys like
I hung
friends?
out. Yeah, we were in college 2 years together in college, eating pizza and late nights for sure.
Dude, I
So
love
I do
him.
follow his podcast.
Yeah, I love his stuff. He's one of the guys I really. I just finished his book, Algebra of Wealth.
It looks great. It looks terrific.
It's a cool book. It's you know it's a good book for like your kid. It's a good book for your sons to read.
Awesome.
Like it's probably not like you're gonna read it. He still has it's. I always like reading like he's got a good voice and stuff like that. Like the way he thinks about things and good. I think he's a pretty smart guy, obviously. But yeah, he's talking about in the book. He talks about this where kids like going into if you start thinking about what you want to do when you grow up, and this is a really good example what you're describing right now. My sister, who's a fashion designer, is a good example. The arts, many of them, if you start looking at it from like again putting on your macroeconomics hat, which you have to ever do every day because you're doing real estate, you're doing big time real estate, you're affected by the macroeconomic currents that are out there, like probably in the most direct way because people are paying you rent every month based on what's happening in the world around them, right? His perspective is if you want to do well financially is go into an industry where they have very, very low unemployment. And so you start looking at the industries like the entertainment industry. He's
Yeah.
like, what 99% unemployment in those industries. Fashion industry, my sister's in fashion, 95, 97% unemployment. So what ends up happening is they're doing you a favor by letting you work at Sony. Because if you don't want that
Right.
job, there's 100 people who will take your job in 2 seconds.
And there's 100 people who tried. You're always. I
Right.
was always in fear, and I was always paranoid about being the next cut. A new chairman would come into the studio. A new person would come in. There was a lot of insecurity at that time about my job because I knew it was a great job. Plus, when you're in acquisitions and production, like basically people hate you because you're in the sexiest part of the business. Like I wasn't in accounting. I was like the guy who took the pitch, and there's a lot of like, obviously it's a very revered job and a lot of people would love to see you fired so there's a lot of pressure on you in that job.
So what's funny is as a young person, when you told people that you're an executive at Sony, you probably felt like a big swinging dick. Like you're like, oh yeah.
Gosh,
like
I was driving a brand new Lexus. I just got that Lexus that came out. I'm going to the studio on my phone, wearing my Hugo Boss suits, and everybody wants to have lunch with you. And my assistant's keeping people away from me in projects, and I had my own patio for my lunch. I could have private meetings outside on my patio. And I'm 30 years old. I mean, it was pretty rad, and I was single, so it was pretty good.
Right. So on one hand, you have all those things, but you're kind of a slave to the corporate, bureaucracy, and you're fearful for your job, but everyone thinks you're cool, right? And they're like, "Oh, JP, like he's killing it. He's working for Sony, yada 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 yada." And then you actually attach your identity to that, right? And then on the other hand, the reality is when that goes away, there's a saying which you probably have heard before, which is success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan, right? So
totally.
I have a question for you because I had a different perspective thing happen to me where I built my first company that grew to $10 million in revenue by the time I was 28. And this is 20 years ago. 20 years ago is when I started the company. So this is like, that'd be like 25 million in revenue now. Right. And so that's pretty damn good for a under 30-year-old. And I was the CEO of the company. And then that company ended up getting crushed by GFC. When the GFC happened, I was a subprime mortgage lender. And I remember by the time I was 38, I was shutting that business down. And my friends who were friends with me, who I was the hotshot entrepreneur, suddenly weren't really seeing what I was up to. They didn't care. And so I remember feeling like really resentful and I felt like a loser. And it took me a few years to claw out of that. So did you have that similar like attachment to your identity, to your career? Like, tell us how you worked through that.
I had nothing to show. I always say my story was horrible. My party story was horrible. Like all the hallmarks of what success would look like. Are you in a relationship? Are you making money? Are you like they were all being unchecked, and I think the humility being a studio executive in a very high profile job and driving the car and wearing the Giorgio Armani to people asking if I sell houses and what happened. What happened? How'd you go from that to selling houses, which I wasn't. Yeah, I think it was a time of great humility, depression, humility, reinvention. But I wouldn't say it was easy. I thought I sold out. I really thought I sold my soul out. Like, how did I go from a hyper creative job to this real estate finance? I almost fell asleep saying the words real estate finance, real estate finance, real estate finance. Like, how boring. And
can I interrupt you? Can I interrupt you? I have to interrupt you because because you were going to appreciate this more than anybody. So
what?
I was a mortgage lender, right? And in 2008, I was a mortgage broker. And if you told people you're a mortgage broker in 2009, 10, people gave you a dirty look, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I stopped telling people I was a mortgage broker, and instead I told them I did real estate finance.
Oh my God.
That was the one thing. That was my savior, was to say that. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm in real estate finance.
Oh, it's too funny.
Anyway, you were embarrassed by it. I was proud to say that.
Darius, I was working in my childhood bedroom answering ads from the newspaper to try to find $25,000 and $50,000 investors. I was doing 16 unit and 24 unit and 60 unit apartment buildings, and just getting. But you know what? It worked. And here was the cool thing. And by the way, I always say my wife didn't marry me for money, because when I met her just about this time, and my wife Janet, who you know very well, she had just moved from San Francisco to LA to take a job, and the job didn't work out. So she came to work, really to help me out. So here she is in my childhood bedroom. I couldn't answer the phone calls from the ad. I had to look like a big company. So Janet was answering the calls for me. So here's this girl who I'm dating. Now she's becoming my girlfriend, who's answering the phones out of my childhood bedroom from newspaper ads so that I can get $25,000 to $50,000 investors.
Wow. And so that's insanity. Obviously it started to work, and did you guys stay in LA for long? How did you transition to Austin? I'd love to hear that part of the story.
Yeah, we started having some success. All that hard work was paying off, and we grew the base. I'm going to say we grew the base to my dad and I to 8 or 10 million, but it was enough. My dad is a really good deal guy too. He's we have Albert Einstein in our family. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but we actually on my dad's side, he's Albert Einstein's third cousin, and my dad does math in his head like he's never used a calculator. He can do everything in his head. It's pretty insane. I am not as good as him, but I do have an instinct for numbers. And so we made money. We got lucky. We hustled. I worked hard. I got my license. I did everything I needed to do, and we started making a little bit of money. And when I started making a little bit of money, I realized I wanted to grow. My dad was kind of done, and I want my instinct, like yours, is let's grow this into something. And I couldn't do it from LA because for two reasons. LA was too expensive of a market. Like, it was too hard for a newbie like me to get into a market is expensive. I couldn't buy you can't for 20 million in LA, you get like a 16 unit building, where in Texas at the time I could get 200 units, right? So I couldn't scale in LA,
right?
And I couldn't and there was too many people, there's too much competition. So partly moving to Austin was to reinvent my identity, to kind of get rid of the LA, Sony guy. 2 was I could afford a house out there and start a job. I could start a business out there because I could afford a house where I couldn't afford a house in LA. And 3 was it was a better market. There was less competition, less expensive, which gave a newbie like me a shot of making a mark into the Austin real estate market. And that's why we moved.
Why did you pick Austin? I mean, first of all, this is what, early 2000s, right?
Yeah. Let's see. I've been here 19 years I've been. So yeah, just about 2005, I guess.
So look, like I first started coming here in 05, and it was a cool enough city. I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's kind of cool. But it was like it real well. And I guess I wouldn't have known to have moved here then. And this is so you moved here right when I first started coming here, and I thought it was a cool enough city, but it definitely was no San Francisco or LA. how did you pick Austin?
I'll take a little credit for this, Darius, because I learned quickly. Here's what I learned quickly. I no longer wanted to do my real estate in markets that I abhorred. And when I was in bad parts of LA or bad parts of Shreveport, Louisiana, it would depress me for days when I got home. It was just like heroin needles on the grass. Like it was poor. But we were making money, but it was just like energetically, I just couldn't do it. So I decided I was going to pick some criteria. And the criteria that I picked is I want a fertile market that I think will grow. I wanted to have a college in it. Like I wanted to have a university because that tends to bring a young, talented workforce, tends to create better, tighter employment. I wanted a capital city because then you always have in economics ups and downs, you always have a stable base. Usually your biggest employer is government. So I had a 50,000 person, well-educated workforce. I had stability with the government, and I knew that the place, Dell, had been there for 10 years. Whole Foods had been there for 8 years. And you could just kind of smell and feel that this place was going to turn into something big. So I will take credit that I saw it and I felt it. And at the time, the Frost Tower was just built. The only big building really downtown was the Frost Tower. If you remember, that's the one that looks like an owl downtown.
Oh, yeah, so no, I know it.
I think I've got really good instincts. In fact, if someone was to ask me, like, JP, why, what's your secret sauce? I think I'm a Sim City guy. I think I am just curious enough that when cities start to form or neighborhoods start to form, I ask a zillion questions because I'm naturally curious and can kind of extrapolate where I think that city's going to go based on jobs, workforce, quality of life, education, and I can kind of see it three-dimensionally. And I will take a little bit of credit because I did see that for Austin. It was a good hunch. A good educated hunch. How about that?
Yeah. Well, it's like hindsight being 2020. I'm like, yeah, you fucking crushed it. You picked like the number one highest growing city in the country, like 15 years in a row, right? So that, I mean, but back then that wasn't the case. It was just a cool city that was doing okay.
There was one big proof thing that intrigued me. There was a statistic that impressed me back then, and I didn't know what it was going to mean, but I said, this city of Austin has historically doubled its population every 20 years since 1900. And I'm thinking to myself, if this is a city that's doubling its population, probably when I moved here, there was probably 500,000 or 600,000. Now there's like 3 million. But I started doing the numbers like you're a numbers guy. I started like thinking, well, gosh, this is going to get exponential. This city has consistently, like if you look at Austin, Texas, its population growth, I've never seen anything so stable. It really doesn't do this. It just does this. And then I thought to myself, gosh, if all of a sudden we're at 600, that means we're going to be at 1 million too. And then we're going to be, and ironically, it's probably growing a little faster. It's accelerated. So I said, gosh, if I could get in now, it's no longer 100,000 or 200,000. It's probably 800,000 to 1.6 million. I'm like, that's 800,000 new people. Well, just like every other business, real estate's a business, especially apartments, it's supply and demand. That means I have 800,000 new housing units to keep me busy for the next 20 years. What I didn't know was going to be more like 1.5 million. To this day, I believe in Austin for the same reason, continue to buy in Austin. Because if I look at, when people say, what do I do with Austin, Texas, in terms of should I buy a house or should I buy an apartment or should I invest in Austin? I always have the same response. I can guarantee you a formula to make money in Austin, Texas. And they say, what's the formula? Hold a property here for 10 years and you can't miss. You cannot miss in Austin, Texas. Forget about this, forget about interest rates, forget about politics, forget about this, forget about that. Just watch. Because as long as you continue doing this, you will have appreciation just based on the basic simple laws of supply and demand. And so far, that's worked pretty well for me. And I think it's going to work well for everyone during their lifetime. So if there's one takeaway, if someone says, I made $1 million, Darius, on this podcast, it would be buy something in Austin that's reasonable and hold it for 10 years and see if you're not pleased with your return.
All right. I love that, man. So so tell us a little bit about Thrive, because you made it out of the entertainment business. You went through the hardship. You obviously had the nose for, like, I mean, literally you couldn't have made a better bet on real estate than what you did, outside of maybe buying beachfront property in Laguna at 2009 or something like that, right? Like probably even then it would be questionable which bet would have been better. So what was it like? Like how, you started Thrive. Thrive, you guys have placed over 2 billion in transaction values over since 2011. When did you start Thrive? What year was that?
Right when I moved to Austin, so 2005. It had a different name. It had a very formal. My California name was Principals Capital Funding because it seemed very, when you're two people in your childhood bedroom, that seems to be a name that's going to give you some weight. But once I started having some success and some vision of where I wanted to take the company, I changed the name to Thrive FP, and the FP is for purpose for profit.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll make sure I call it Thrive FP.
It's okay.
So it's
Otherwise,
funny.
you might get salad dressing delivered to your house if you don't.
So Thrive FP, you started that in LA and rebranded it, and so at what point did you? I mean, was it one of those things where you're like, I mean, you've obviously had a great run. We were talking about this the other night at dinner, but like, was there any like aha moments where you're like, I'm going to grow this thing into something massive? Or was it always I mean, you're a big thinker. Was that always the goal? And then you just went and executed on it? Or was there a moment where you're like, oh, there's something here. And then you started leaning into it and really making it what it is now?
Yeah, there was a dream and a vision for this. I think part of coming from LA and Hollywood, I was used to like dreaming big. I was in the business of dreaming big for a long time and getting paid for it. So that was pretty cool. I got to make some pretty cool things and be part of some pretty neat projects. So that might have given me a little bit of confidence. But to this day, I always think big. I love figuring stuff out, and I'm very visual. But I think the moment that was really interesting, Darius, is that when I really launched here in Austin in 25, we were still coming out very similar to today, like almost coming down from a downturn. Things were very sober. There's still foreclosures in the market. And investors were gun shy. There was this guy named Bernie Madoff who was doing some wily things, if you remember Bernie Madoff, and a guy named Alan Stanford. So investors were nervous. The market was down, very much like now, where I always say investors they're irrationally exuberant at the top of the market, like they can never lose, and they're irrationally fearful at the bottom of a market. And I was more towards that irrationally fearful side of the market. And I'll tell you what I did. There was two things that really, to answer your question, that really, one was I'm like, how am I going to get investors' confidence when investors are fearful? And I'm not really known that well. And there was this technology called Dropbox that had just come out. And no one had thought about this. So my thought was, like, I said to people, look, and I started doing loans, like hard money loans. And I said, look, you don't have to trust me. Like towards the Bernie Madoff thing is like, I'm going to put all this diligence in this thing called Dropbox. And you and your attorneys can go on the internet. And by the way, you don't have to send me a check. You can just send it to the title company and your name will be on the deed of trust. So literally the entire transaction, you control everything. You control the diligence, you control the money, and you control the title. So all you're doing is you're paying me for underwriting and bringing you a good deal. And that was a game changer because money started coming in a really hard time with that offer to investors. And some took me up on it. And some just said, if this guy's willing to go that far, then I trust him. And they would just give me the money anyways. But that technology at the time, which now seems like, a cloud, big deal. Everyone's got a cloud. But being there at the beginning of the cloud and being able to take advantage of that technology in the real estate market was a game changer for me starting to get investors. And then the other game changer was a very well-known influencer here in town checking me out for about a year, getting to know me, doing his diligence, trusting me, and having me and my partner, Adrian, on his show as a cash flow real estate guy. And I joke that I'm not a real estate company, that I'm really an internet startup, because he had a very large audience. And literally the momentum of my technology, at that point, I knew enough that thank goodness I knew what to do with success and money. And in terms of like, I knew how to underwrite real estate. If you don't know how to underwrite real estate, this is all a waste of time. And so I knew enough to not blow my chance. So when my wave came of an influencer bringing me checks, Austin coming at the beginning of a recovery, and me knowing enough instinctually, embracing technology, the new technologies, Dropbox is probably like AIs now. It's probably like it's like embracing ChatGPT, where it actually does something to move the needle forward. And all those things was part of my secret sauce that really was like, oh shit, this is going to go somewhere.
So that was what, around 08, 09? Is that when kind of everything came together? And how long had
Yeah.
you been, and I know Adrian as well. How long were you guys partners for at that point in time?
Well, we weren't partners. It was my own company. Adrian was working for me. Adrian was working
Oh,
for a home builder during the downturn, and we were buddies, and we were having lunch, and he's like, "What do you think about the economy?" I'm like, "I don't think you should be working for a home builder right now." And he said, he's like, "What do you think I should be doing?" I'm like, "I don't know, but not that." And he said, "Well, what if I come to work for you and raise money, and for these hard money loans that you're doing with this thing called Dropbox?" I said, "Sure, there's no salary. I can't pay you, but if you want to come and work on commission, you're welcome to come." And I think his wife was very unhappy that he accepted that offer. I think she was stressed out that he accepted that offer. So Adrian really came fully believing in the vision with no money, taking all the risk, and it turned out to become this beautiful partnership. But I always say that that's always the hardest part, coming in when there's just a vision and some hope, like a little proof, but not a crazy amount of proof that this thing could scale.
what year? So what year? What did that transpire? I'm just curious.
So Adrian's been I think we've been together for about 14 or 15 years. So let's work it backwards. So
Okay.
call it 14 years ago.
Oh
So
nine,
2010.
10. So
Yeah, 09,
so
2010.
2010.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'd say it worked out fairly well for him and for you, for both
I
of you
think it
guys.
worked.
I mean, that sounds like a
He's
really,
picked up a real taste for exotic cars, so I think he's doing okay. No, it worked out great for both of us. It did. And
no,
it's I'll tell you what's interesting. 15 years into this relationship, we've definitely had some ups and downs. I think that having a partner is very much like a marriage, where you have your highlights. It's like, I'm a team person. We had our moments where I think we could have easily just broken up the band. But I think, like a marriage, that once you kind of get better at knowing the person's buttons, and I think it comes down to respect and maybe some skills. Like, we actually have a coach that helps us. We actually commit 8 hours a month to just coaching. We're out of the office and just coaching. But it's like, I'd say it's
wow,
not that different than than maybe the practice you have in a good marriage. You call it a devotional practice when your wife's not behaving and you still have to smile anyways or eat shit just because, like, you love her enough even though she's annoying the crap out of you. Like, that never happens to me. This is hypothetical. But
yeah, not even
it
once.
never happens. Never happens. I'm just saying that could hypothetically happen.
You've heard of people who deal with that, not you.
Rumor has it. So so I think Adrian's become that to me. I've learned a lot about, after 15 years of this partnership, like, there is a devotion at this point that I don't know if there was always that total mutual respect. I think there was two guys on a mission, but I don't know if we ever really got through of, like, what it's like to be a founder, what it's like. I think for a lot of times, like, he slowly worked his way into the company. Like, I think he was resentful at times that I was making more than him. Like, there's like all these resentments that build, and styles are different. And why are you doing this? And why are you doing this? And really, in the last few years, maybe even the last year, I think we've taken the time to say we're each other's ride or die. And like, it's just like a marriage. You're like, it becomes more of a devotional practice. It's not like, are we going to stay together? It's like no matter what, even when you're annoying the shit out of me, even when I don't agree with you, how do we become a we? How does the staff, how does our team, how does the business, how do we transmit as a we collectively in all the big decisions in the company? And we've committed to each other for doing that.
Now, you guys have built at Thrive FP. You guys have built a really amazing business. It was funny when I met him, actually before I met you, like a week before, through Tiger 21.
You met him at Tiger 21, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I met Adrian, and then, like, literally, we met a week later, and I'm like, wait, I just met your business partner. And so he was telling me, yeah, I was a social worker, and then I got into real estate. And we do this socially driven, business where we help our tenants. And I remember I'd been telling my wife, I'm like, oh, I think if I was to ever do a real estate business, I would, help the tenants. And I was like, oh, these guys are doing that. That's so cool. But tell our audience a little bit about what makes Thrive FP different than just a normal person that owns apartment buildings and brings in investors, because you guys are doing something very special, very unique, and very socially conscious. And I think it really, I was just actually typing like ideas for the name of the title of this podcast, but I was like, it's really building a purpose-driven business, and it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to do it. I'd love for you to talk about where did the idea come from, what are you guys doing, and why did you decide to go in that direction?
Yeah, so I think that coming from a creative background, at Sony, I was looking. I had it for my own sanity. I had to make this real estate finance job creative and juicy, or I would just die. Like I would just die of boredom. And I'm a very right brain, left brain person. And Darius, you've been in my office. It's interesting. At my office door, if you notice, the first word above my door when you walk into the office, do you remember the word? Do you remember what words there, Darius?
Remind me. I remember there was a word.
Creative.
Remind me. That's right.
Creative, okay. Right? So I kind of made a stand that I'm going to take this what could be a boring financial job and turn it into something creative. And I think that was literally I posted on my office thing. I made that declaration, first of all. Changed the name of the company to Thrive FP. And what I realized as I was going through this exploration is that our industry is so much about the money and pleasing investors. And John Mackey talks about this, the founder of Whole Foods and conscious capitalism, that as capitalism, as well-meaning as it is, we tend to overcompensate our shareholders and our investors, sometimes over the rest of the stakeholders in your business. So over your team, over your customers, you tend to sometimes, do that. And I realized that real estate was no different, that a lot of my colleagues were calling these tenants pieces of traffic. How many pieces of traffic came through the door this week? We were commoditizing the product. And it happens all the time. My industry generally commoditizes the product, and the product are humans that rent your apartments. And I think for me, it was two things. I mean, honestly, part of it was like getting to my own level of success and confidence, where it's like, there's got to be a better way to do that, where you can recognize the residents, kind of the John Mackey, where in conscious capitalism, where all the stakeholders win. And then it seems to me, as I really started digging into it, it seems to me if you actually treat your residents well, then they're going to stay longer and they're going to give you referrals. And if they stay longer and give you referrals, then you're going to have better resident retention. And then if you have better resident retention, then your investors win. But if you think your investors are going to win just because you're going to raise rents or there's only two ways to make money or to kind of continue making money for investors besides cap rate compression. It's simply you raise rents or you lower expenses, right? This isn't a hard business. We got two levers. And so
yep.
My idea was, well, I'm not an angel. I'm still a for-profit. I still raise rents and I try to lower expenses when I can. But can you do that in a way that's accretive to the investors and not extractive? Because if you come with just simply that awareness was the start, like just coming in accretively, and the more accretive you can be, you're going to create more robust resident retention. What we found out through the years of doing this business is you create in Texas about 20% greater resident retention. So 20% of my residents will stay 6 to 12 months longer, simply because you've provided this for them. So
that's amazing.
I love this idea. And even my podcast, Investing on Purpose, it's this idea that purpose-driven initiatives that start with strong purpose or whys create outsized returns. And I think my own journey of realizing this, and listen, it's no secret. And the nonprofit that we have, the Veritas that you mentioned, simply creates free resident programs for these renters around health, education, and financial advancement. We do everything from telemedicine through teledoc, free telemedicine, to tutoring in any language that your kid needs help through a digital tutor. Things like that are the kind of programs we do. And what I found is that sometimes people want to do these programs because they care in their heart, and sometimes people just want to make a better bottom line. And I know that to do this, you got to convince people that doing good and doing well are the same thing. So I'm like a passionate capitalist that wants to prove in my podcast by interviewing other entrepreneurs. I want to prove again and again to the world that doing the right thing can create outsized returns if it's thought through. It enhances your business model. And then you can feel really good about what you're doing. But it doesn't have to be, I don't have to say to you as a potential investor, Darius, do you want to invest with me? You'll make 4% less, but you're going to make a child happy. Like, you'd be like, dude, I love you, dude, but bro, I'm going to go somewhere else. Some people will do those like funds. But what if I say to you, Darius, like, do you want to invest with me? And by the way, I've got 20% higher resident retention than my competition. So typically on my track record, I'm making 2 to 4% more than my competition because my residents stay longer. And you can feel good. I'm going to send you videos. I'll show you what we're doing. I'll show you the daycare programs. I'll show you the telemedicine. I'll report numbers to you. And that's the dream. I still feel like I'm a work in progress. The nonprofit has 7,000 units under coverage. So we cover about 21,000 people right now. And I really wanted to grow it. My dream of this is 100,000 people. And it's not all my units, by the way. This is open to any apartment owner who wants to do this. And my dream is 100,000 because I believe at 100,000 units, which is 300,000 people, I can change the industry. Where literally, if you're not doing this, like residents will be so educated that almost the way they can expect a gym or a swimming pool, they can start to expect that these kind of programs are an amenity that comes with rent. And I think at 100,000, I scale enough that I educate my consumer base to expect it. So then if you're not offering it, I'm going to kick your ass. And so will the other people who are doing the right thing. It's almost just like swimming pool or no swimming pool, laundry machine, no laundry machine, telemedicine, no telemedicine. And that's the simple dream that I'm growing.
I love that, man. So I was doing some quick math. First of all, you don't even like. Do you know the story of the pink unicorn that's hanging over my shoulder? No. Have I told you anything about this? That's a pink unicorn. So I had no idea. Like you and I have lived parallel lives. I went into boring mortgage business. I used to joke that people's eyes would glaze over when I said the word mortgage, and that it was like offensive to me. I was like, Jesus, I'm embarrassed about what I do, right? And so like I was always like, God, like I picked like the least sexy industry, right? And it was like, and I'm a creative, and I had the same thing as you. I'm like, man, I'm a hardcore creative, and so I went into a business that was. I said, everyone here is economic animals. My business partner now calls them hyenas. They're just all about the money. Everything's a transaction. In our business, we say you call them traffic. We said everyone's a loan number in the mortgage business. Yep. And I was like, oh man, I'm going about this totally differently. I want to create happiness in the mortgage business, and I want people to love their lender. Right. Like, so I had no idea that we had this in common like this. It does not surprise me one bit, but
tell me more about the pink unicorn.
One more reason why
tell me about the pink unicorn.
So the pink unicorn was after 08, 09. You got to imagine mortgage lending business, which you were on the opposite side of it in that you were a real estate person with real estate, the hard real asset. I was the person lending to, I was doing residential lending. Right. So in 2006, from 2006 to 2011, the mortgage lending business lost 75% of its workforce. 3/4 of the workforce left the industry. And it wasn't because they wanted to, it was because 3/4 of the companies went out of business.
Yep.
So if you can imagine, when an industry goes from 400,000 workforce to 100,000 workforce over 5 years, it's pretty harsh, right? It's hard to stay in business. You're kind of like, robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're scraping. What I used to say was the mortgage industry, because it caused GFC, was the comet that hit the ground, and everyone was pissed at that comet, right? And what was left were the little scurrying animals that hit underground, and the dinosaurs were the mortgage companies that all went out of business. And then you would have these little animals that survived, and so they were like killing each other for food because there was hardly any food for 5 years, and so. Fast forward to 2011, like, dude, it was just a harsh environment. Like, all the team members were treated like shit. There's tons of turnover. It was just, everyone was like me, embarrassed to tell people they were in the business. So the culture of the industry was really bad, 2011, 2012. And so I was like, when I started my next business, the business that had the pink unicorn in it, I said, I want us to stand. I was coming up with the core purpose of the business, and I said, our purpose should be to grow happiness. So our core purpose was to grow happiness, and I said we are gonna signify happiness in the lending industry, happiness for homeowners, and happiness for our team members, and we're gonna just have fun, man. We're gonna make this a fun business again. and we're going to make money because people are going to work harder, and we're going to do great things, and we're going to help homeowners and help our team. And so that was our core purpose. Then we had core values, and as you know, I'm a core value guy. And then Mariah, my wife, who you know, actually I don't think I've ever told the story to the audience before. My wife, who's very crafty, she's an artisan. She makes tons of artistic stuff. My son Rumi, who's 15 now, he was probably 3 at the time. So yeah, 2009, he was actually 4 at the time. She used to make us T-shirts for Christmas every year. So she would silk screen us T-shirts. And so she silk screened, my son was obsessed with Pinkie Pie Pony from My Little Pony when he was 3. So she made him a pink unicorn T-shirt on a gray T-shirt. And then she made me a matching black pink unicorn T-shirt. So every Friday we would have casual Fridays in my office, back when people worked in the office and back when you did casual Fridays. And I walked into my office. I wore my black pink unicorn T-shirt to work, and my team went nuts. And they're like, and we had been thinking about a mascot that symbolized our core purpose. And so I told my team, I said, hey, look, if we hit our goal for the month, I'll get you all pink unicorn T-shirts. And dude, the thing went viral in my company. And before I knew it, I had 1,000 employees wearing pink unicorn T-shirts, tracksuits.
Wow.
Trade shows, everything. I'll show you pictures. It's phenomenal. But it became, I said, the pink unicorn is a majestic creature that symbolizes happiness in the lending industry. So that's the story of it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that story with me. That's so awesome. The hardest part sometimes is finding metrics though. Did you have like a person like responsible? How did you what was your dream of saying, I know I'm achieving this happiness? Was there something you had?
Yeah. So I, unlike you, I had business partners who were hardcore transactional bankers. They are, whether they like it or not, if they hear me, they'll agree. They are economic animals. And so they were like, who's this dude that's like all about this pink unicorn bullshit?
Gotcha.
And I was CEO.
Gotcha.
And so I was like, all right, man, I got to prove it to my business partners that I'm getting them to invest money. So I wanted them to, I said, look, they're not going to, we had 1,000 employees. It's expensive to do cultural things. It's expensive to invest in the culture when you have that many people because you're catering to a lot of people. And so I was like, look, I got to prove to them that this is helping the bottom line. So it's actually chapter 7 in my book, Core Value Equation. I was like, look, we have to measure in team engagement, profitability, KPIs, productivity metrics, benchmark. I measure, if you could measure it, I measured it. But the main ones for me were NPS, ENPS, and Q12, Gallup's engagement data. And then I cross-referenced that against every productivity metric that there was in my industry. And we were crushing. We were beating every industry benchmark.
Love it.
And we beat every industry benchmark on the happiness stuff too. So correlation or causation, you tell me. But I was like, look, it's working. And my whole goal was, hey, I just want them to not fight me on budget for this. So I just got to prove that it's working. And it did. And we kept investing in it, and I learned a lot. So it's like anything, man. People that are engaged, Gallup has a lot of data on this. Team members that are engaged, those companies are 20% more profitable. When you said the number that you have 20% more retention, I was like, yeah, that comes out for the average person that listens to this. For an average rent of $1,500, that's $720 additional dollars per year, NOI. And in a real estate business, that's $15,000 of asset value at a 5 cap per unit.
And that's just one. That's per unit.
I was doing the math while you were talking. So JP, I know we're getting towards the end of the show here. You have an awesome, amazing podcast. And like one of the three, like we were talking, you're like, hey man, I want to come on the show. And I really wanted, for the listeners of the show, if you want to learn about amazingness when it comes to investing and just like living life to its fullest, and the type of guests you guys get on the show is really, really impressive. Tell us a little bit about the podcast, how it got started, who you're interviewing, the whole reason for it. I would love to educate our audience on your podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, I think a lot of it's part of our story. Like, I think you started to realize that.
So JP, you have an amazing podcast. First of all, I really appreciate you telling your story. I didn't realize how much we had in common in business. We're going to get to talk about this stuff offline some more. But one other thing we have in common, I'm telling you, man, like you're like my brother from another mother. Like we
Yes.
both start our own podcasts. Like we just have like this kindred connection, man. But you have an amazing podcast. You have amazing guests. You're teaching people so much about how to live a more wealthy life. I would love if you wouldn't mind telling our audience a little bit about your podcast so they can come and learn more and check it out.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I kind of stemmed from those apartment buildings of like, how do we create more? Like, how do we create more? Like, somebody wins and the other person doesn't have to lose. It's like what we talked about earlier. So investing on purpose is all about this idea that purpose-driven businesses not only create outsized returns, but create a happier human. And I spent a lot of time in my podcast interviewing top CEOs, thought leaders. Really what we're looking at is there's money and there's wealth. And Darius, you and I've had, like similar things. You can get to a certain amount of money and without literacy, without passion, without purpose, without owning your time, without owning your mindset, you don't have wealth, you have money. And so a lot of what investing on purpose is we go through this thing called four-dimensional wealth. And we really go through each pillar of what actually creates wealth. And what really creates a wealthy person is not your money, because your money can become actually what enslaves you. It's your money working for you because you know your why, you know your vision, you know how much money it takes per year to feed that vision, whether it's taking your kids on a crazy trip, launching a second business, investing, philanthropy. It's your relationships in your community. Who do you have in your community? What kind of relationships? Do you have deep friendships? Do you connect to, philanthropy? Do you connect to individuals? Do you connect to a religious thing? Whatever it is, like what connects you? How is your relationship like with your spouse, your kids? And then of course there's purpose, right? So what is the why that makes you cry? What is it? And then how do you tie all these things, your time, your purpose, your community relationships, and your investments, and bring them together so that they're working harmoniously for you? So instead of having this thing called money, which you don't know if it's enough, we always joke, Scott Galloway talks about this a lot, like how much is enough? Well, how do you know if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing and what makes you happy and what's winning the game? What do most people say? When you ask Darius, most people, what's winning the game? Or what would it be like for you to be wealthy? What would that be? Most people come back with a number. And I promise you a number that is untethered in these other aspects of four-dimensional wealth is a waste of time. So my podcast is really there to not only inspire, but to create financial literacy, strategies in the how and why to create four-dimensional wealth so that you can truly create wealthy people. Someone who can go to sleep peacefully, wake up happy, and live their day in presence. And when you're doing those things, you've created true wealth for yourself.
Yeah, man. You guys, we're going to make sure to put that in the show notes. It's an awesome podcast. I can't wait. He and I have rescheduled our podcast with each other like probably six times.
We really have.
So we got one of them done, but I'll be on the podcast soon enough. But you got some amazing guests. Garrett Gunderson just did it. He did our show previously, so I highly recommend it. And we ended up talking stand-up comedy the whole time. You guys probably talked more about the wealth side. But
we went deep into the why and the how. We definitely did. It was great. I don't know if you know who Jason Karp is. I just had Jason Karp. Karp was just with RFK, in Washington, D.C. And they're trying to get the red dye 40 and all the carcinogenic food out of the U.S. supply. These American companies, as you maybe know, they do healthier versions abroad because they don't have the regulation. But in the U.S., where we're soft on regulation, we're producing things that are known to be known carcinogens and feeding them to our children because we have softer laws here. And Jason's really standing up for that. And it was that and Garrett. I mean, the podcasts I've been very fortunate to have friends like you and a community like you that I get to share some cool things in this subject.
That's so cool, man. So we'll go ahead. We'll put that in the show notes. You guys could check it out. It's on all the major podcast platforms. And so with that said, where else what I'd like to do is people can find you on the podcast. We'll make sure we put that in there. Where can people find the podcast? Remind us what the name of it is, and where else can they connect with you for all things my main man, JP Newman, is promoting and doing in life?
Absolutely. So the podcast is Investing on Purpose, and I'm on all the major platforms. So, from Spotify to YouTube to Apple, we're on everything. So please come. I think you'll love the show. Please come on and take a listen. Personally, Thrive FP, if you want to know more about what I do on the commercial real estate side and how we do these community-driven businesses, I'm actually, for the first time in 2 years, I'm beginning to raise money again because I'm seeing real estate that's starting to make sense, because I feel like we're just kind of in that part of the cycle where I see opportunities coming. So On the real estate side, it would be thrivefp.com, THRIVE, FP, frankpeter.com.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and put that in the show notes. And with that said, my man, are you ready for the greatness question?
I'm ready for the greatness question. Let me have it.
All right. So what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how have you overcome it?
Good question. I think for me, the number one barrier to creating greatness was failure, a lot of failure. And I think, and a bad story. And so I think for me, there's probably 20 times where I probably should have quit because I had no evidence that I was ever going to succeed. I tried many things in my 20s and my early 30s, switching careers, all the things I told you about. Really, like my brain, it'd be very easy to say, you're not worth it. You're not going to make it. If you look at the evidence, it's not happening. And I think that the barrier that really was different for me was tenacity. And I'm not even sure to this day, Darius, if it was my tenacity or that literally my parents and my family told me at a young age that I had something special. Like you, JP, have something special about you. And I believed them. So I believe the story. And maybe there's more to it than just the story. But I think the fact of having parents telling me at an early age and relatives telling me at an early age, like you have something special. When I'd have those days or my ninth failure, I would get back and try one more time because I believed there was something in me that really believed in me because I felt like I was something special.
Yeah. Well, I like being an outsider looking in, my friend. I wouldn't even need to know your track record to know that you definitely are someone special. So there's no question about that.
Mutual.
What an amazing time. JP, you are a scholar and a gentleman and just an all around badass human. I love you, brother. And I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Yes, it was so much fun. Going down the rabbit hole with you and realizing how much we have in common as brothers. I just so appreciate your time and your generosity. You pink unicorn, you.
They used to call me the Grand Pink Unicorn.
Grand Pink Unicorn.
You guys, go check out JP's podcast, Investing on Purpose. Check out thrivefp.com. Check out all things JP Newman if you want to just learn about an all-around amazing human. And share this. People should be hearing this because I think JP's story is a story of resilience and really like living your passions to create greatness, really what the show's all about. Really excited for all the amazingness you're bringing into the world, my brother. Until next time, peace out, everybody. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.